What it do, Facetteers? It's your boy DeMarcus, and we back with another episode. If you haven't been following my pages, make sure you check my food page on. Check out my food and my personal pages. The food page is Matching Up with Marco on Instagram and TikTok. The personal page is That Man Marco on Instagram and TikTok, and then my YouTube page is The Multifacet of DeMarcus. So make sure you go check that out. Definitely do your due diligence. Tap in with your boy. Show some love. And yeah, we're going to keep it moving, man. So, for today's episode, the topic just slipped my mind. It's crazy as I was talking. What was going to be my topic for today? There we go. I don't even know how I forgot that. But for the topic for today, I want to talk about when you've been disciplined and consistent, just because you take time off or just because your rhythm may switch up doesn't mean that you failed. So I'm going to find a way to make that applicable to the title, but I really want to talk about that because I'm someone that can be my worst critic and I can be in my head a lot. And a challenge for myself for this year is to severely lessen the overthinking. Severely lessen overthinking. Last year, I promised myself moving forward that there would be no self-sabotage in regards to letting ourselves go to the ground, letting other people be the reason that we don't pour into ourselves and that we hurt ourselves more. Meaning we were eating more, letting ourselves go because of just things that we can experience, just from life and just let other people get to us. We're not doing that no more. But more importantly, what I've even learned is that overthinking is a big part of that too. And oftentimes for myself, I've realized that when you're in survival mode and when you've been in a lot of spaces where survival mode has just been the main topic of discussion indirectly, that becomes your lifestyle all the time. And you realize that even when it comes to celebrations and when it comes to accomplishments, it's so minuscule in how those are celebrated that the word celebration is almost kind of just it's kind of a shockwave. You just kind of when you hear it, you're it's shocking to even think that celebrating yourself on any type of scale makes sense because all you've known is survival. But you get to a point to where, especially you're having experiences, you go through people celebrating you, celebrating yourself, that you learn that celebration should be a thing. And at any point in life, everybody should have been at least celebrated in something, especially if you're a good person. Now, if you're not a good person, you treat people wrong, in a way you should be getting celebrated. But more importantly, when we go through celebrations, we shouldn't have to always wait for these huge celebrations. It shouldn't just be birthdays and holidays and stuff like that. We really should be celebrating the small moments that we persevere and move forward and achieve things in our life. But specifically for the topic of today's discussion, just because things may not you may not be at the same pace or level that you were for whatever period of time that you were putting in work, doesn't mean that you fell off. And let me just go ahead and give an example. When I think about last year, I ended up losing 49 pounds by the end of August. And I probably could have lost a lot more, right? Now, there's been plenty of times in the past where I've lost weight. I've lost, I think around, I've lost 50 pounds before. I've lost 30, 40, 20, multiple times. And they've all been periods to where of 2 and 3 months, right? And oftentimes what I would do, I had to learn how to be able to create lifestyle in a way to where I didn't allow myself to fall out, because the problem that I had at first is that I'd have those small bits of spurts of motivation. And then whenever it's a trip or something's over, or whenever, I got to a certain point, I would get complacent and comfortable with that. And what would happen is I didn't build up the skill set or the mindset to say, how do we keep on pushing through even when we may not necessarily feel as motivated or whatever. And in the past year, I did that. And so even with me losing 49 pounds, what I did in the first couple months, I was going hard with it. I was locked in. And then I wanted to find a way to allow myself to splurge, starting off with like just chips or something like it's kind of carb heavy first, and then eventually adding in the sugar. The reason why I wanted to do that because I wanted to train my mind and say, even when you go through hard things and you accomplish hard stuff, there may be points to where you're not in that same type of mode, or you just live in life, and then you may not be in that same high dedication level that you are, but you can be dedicated in a different type of way. And neither, like, just because you choose one or the other doesn't mean that you're less locked in. And that was a huge turning point for me because even in the way in which I lost weight, it took a bit longer in regards to, contrast to how it's been before with me losing all the weight in a set period of time. But it also allowed me to appreciate the results a lot more because it showed me how I can be consistent over time. And it showed me that the way in which I was even dieting to lose weight, while it was cool, it wasn't as effective as this way. Because typically when I did my fast and stuff in the past, I didn't even realize that I could drink way more water than I was. And I realized even going too fast and stuff this past time that by me drinking more water, it allowed my mind to get away from not thinking about food. Versus when I was doing some of the heavier dry fast. I've done some dry fast recently, but I wouldn't drink enough water for when I would go onto the dry fast. So in the past, when I do the dry fast, you know what I'm saying? I'm mentally fighting through wanting to have food and stuff like that, and then the cravings would be out of control. But in the past year, guess what happened? When I would fast, coming off of a fast, went straight to low carb, easy, high protein, and then I would ease my way into eating sweets and chips and stuff weeks later. But I didn't feel compelled to have to do it right after. And what that's taught me is that as you continue to put in work, DeMarcus, you're going to realize that, again, there's going to be times where things just ain't in alignment. You know what I'm saying? You may be out, you may be enjoying yourself, eating a good amount of food. Holidays came around, I ate a good amount of food. I allow myself to splurge. But what I noticed is, even as some weight went back on my body on the scale, I was doing planks at a way higher rate than I was when I got my most lean, when I got down to 49 pounds. I was doing way more push-ups. I was doing, my endurance was even higher when I picked up even more weight. Why? Because that glycogen was gone while I was leaning. So while I was leaning out, I'm losing like a lot of glycogen because I wasn't really eating as many carbs. Maybe from the chips and stuff like that, but there were times where I went on and off from even having carbs or as many carbs, and so that changed up, how my body was how the fullness of my body looked. The point that I'm making is that even when I was going into a phase of getting back to eating, a good amount, or eating my foods, my sweets and stuff like that, I had to tell myself, DeMarcus, you haven't fallen off because you're doing more than you did when you was your lowest weight. And then I turned that into let me continue to learn more about my body. You know what I learned? As I'm carbs is not the terrible thing, because I was always so much on heavy low carb because I'm carbs is the killer when it's really the sweets. And so I had to realize sugar is the main thing. Now I love me some chocolate chip cookies. I love cakes and Pop-Tarts and stuff like that, but continuously eating sweets is what's going to get me out of order. But what I had to also realize is that by me putting on some weight and then adding in creatine and stuff into my plan, I realized that my muscles would get more full. So I said, okay, it's not just about being lean. Now we can actually get bigger, get the bulk in, get the size, and cut back down, and our body's going to look way better than it did being lean. But during that period, though, what I would do, I'd be like, man, I got to sit here and let me go ahead and do some wall sits and let me do some planks to make sure that I ain't lost it. And I've always been like that because what will happen is it's going back to the old survival mindset. When you're in survival mode, you're grinding it out, you're figuring it out, and you're sticking it through. But you don't realize that once you come out of that, you don't realize how dominant you can truly be, because when you're in that grind mode, all you're thinking about is grind. When you come out of it, you start to kind of think about freedom. You start to think about the fruits of your labor. But what has to happen is you have to realize that now I'm in a better situation. Now I can afford to do things differently. It's like when somebody, if they've been in the trenches, you know, and I'm not saying trenches like the hood, I'm talking about just in general, like when things are just low, where things are just like it was hard, and all of a sudden you get some money, you ain't got to grind like you did before. You got to be more responsible, but you ain't got to grind like you did before because now you can buy your freedom a bit more. You should still have a similar work ethic, but you may not necessarily have to do as many hours. You may be able to do, you know, you may be able to find, you have a job now where you can be more efficient in the time that you work and still get more done. It's just about learning that. And I know for myself, like, especially in these past years and even where I'm at now, it's like I'm learning my body more. I'm learning just life more. I'm learning myself as I continue to make the strides that I've just been in survival for so long. And as I've gotten out of that mindset, and there's nothing wrong with being like, there's a time and place to be in that, but it shouldn't be all the time. But as you're growing and evolving, it's like, you know what? Ain't no wrong with spending a little bit of money over here. You ain't got to be super cutthroat to where you can't spend nothing because you're afraid to go back to your situation. No, live. Be responsible, but live. Because you can still do less and still get a higher value than you was getting putting in more work. Think about certain type of jobs. It's not that just because you work hard at the job that you don't get more money. You still getting your hourly and salary just like everybody else. Especially for like manufacturing jobs, desk jobs, all that type of stuff. You're doing extra work for nothing. That's not going towards your brand. That's not helping you get more money in your pockets. That's not, all you doing is helping to fulfill somebody else's brand. But now if you get like a higher paying job and you need to work different hours because it can help you to be able to get more in your commission, it can help you to be able to get more visibility into a different type of role, that's different. But you still going to be able to do that once you level up at a much lesser rate than you would putting in all the hard work for something that didn't acknowledge the value that you had. And so that's been a huge lesson for me. And it's still been hard, but it's continuing to reiterate to myself that as you're continuing to go along this part of the journey, you haven't fallen off, DeMarcus, because you've built too much discipline and consistency in your routine and in your life to allow yourself to even go back to where you used to be. And so what happens is, it's the same way what I'm talking about for the content in the previous episode. Once you do a little bit here, once you do a little bit there, as you continue to be in certain type of spaces, you still got to eat. So there's going to be points where I'm going to be cooking eventually, then I can record that. And so I'm continuing to cook outside of me doing content. I'm still building the reps. It's just people ain't seeing it. It's the same thing with anything for yourself. As you continue to focus on other areas of life, that don't mean that because you focus a little bit more on a new job now that you ain't focused on the gym. Hey, it may just be you doing 20 push-ups a day this week and then getting back into the gym next week. But you still active though. Because then what's going to happen? Once you finally get your flow, because you've been adding in the reps, because since you've been working, you ain't been really eating as much. You've been drinking more water. You've been kind of more focused. Like, shoot, when that third week hits, you're going to be like, damn, I'm slimmer. My body feels better. I've been more productive. And I got a better peace of mind. And I got more money in my pockets. So all those things can work together. And I've learned that from myself. And again, it's a continued process, but it's definitely been more exciting just seeing, like, as I continue to allow myself just, I won't even say peace, but patience. It's opened up this realm of me being surprised each and every time that whenever I think that I've fallen off, or whenever I think that I'm not doing enough, I'm doing way more than I even thought. And that's why I'm saying taking a step back and and reducing the overthinking, because you're never going to stop overthinking, but severely reducing it, because every single time that I feel that I'm not doing something, or feel that something's not enough, it's way more than I thought, or way more than it showed, or way more than it should be. I wouldn't even say way more than it should be because it was meant to be, right? That's just a me thing. And so if you're somebody that does that, like really look at yourself and be like, reflect on the year, reflect on the previous month. Like, what all have you been doing? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's no way if you've been putting in work for multiple months that you just going to gain, especially if you've been doing it past, I think if you've been doing the past 3 or 4 months, come on now. Like, there's no way you just going to gain it back and then not have the muscle to be able to get back into that zone. It's different if you've been doing it just for like a certain type of event, but you talking about you've been working out for like over a year, like you don't just lose that muscle unless you just don't care, unless you're doing it for somebody else. Like, no, it's still there with you. But back just to the previous episode, like when you continue to do things in increments, and then also you allow yourself to feel, to have those emotions, to be able to build, understand who you are, understand why you feel the way you do, allow yourself to experience the ups and downs of motivation and inspiration, then you're gonna be like, I ain't never lost it. I won't never lose it. Because even when I feel that I do, I'm always growing in another area. So if you're not growing, you won't feel that. Because you can be doing all these different things, but if you don't find value in yourself, if you don't have a reason for why you're doing it, or you at least don't feel any purpose outside of like just for other people, then you're doing it for the wrong reason. But I can feel everything that I'm saying because I find value and purpose in what I do. And it continues to show, even in moments to where I feel that things may be off, it shows. I'm able to recognize it, but also other people can too. So this is your boy DeMarcus, man. If you're somebody that is always like making it seem as if you falling off the map or everything's coming to an end because you slipped up or you may be in a different season or things may not flow the same ways in which they were, like stop doing that. Because the moment that you say the one day where you ain't did something and you get back to it, you probably gonna do it 2 or 3 times better than you did when you were really, really locked in. Why? Because your mind's been able to get out of that survival mode. And staying in survival mode ain't the way all the time. Because once you get better things, like you got to think better. You got to be able to enjoy that because now the life experience, your mind has become a lot sharper to be able to handle what's in front of you. So it's your boy DeMarcus, man. We up out of here. Peace.